Welcome to Coffee, Missions, and New Vision. Hi, I am your host, Felicia Zamora, former Amos Delegations Coordinator, now Associate Pastor in Pastoral Care at the North Hills Community Baptist Church in Pittsburgh, PA. Welcome to our second episode. Today we're going to have the opportunity to hear from one of our Amos staff members, Marissa Alanis. Marissa currently works as Amos Donors Relations Officer, but before, Marissa served on several mission teams with Amos and the First Baptist Church of Ann Arbor in Michigan. In this interview, she is going to share with us her perspective on short-term missions, what information can be helpful for future leaders, what books and articles can folks use to educate themselves, and she will also speak from her own personal experience about being with groups from the U.S. and Nicaragua. Let us hear what Marissa has to say. All right, everybody. Good day to all of you. This is Pastor Felicia Zamora here with another of our podcasts that we're actually broadcasting today. And this morning, I actually have the pleasure of having Marissa Alanis
Yes.
my program today for all your listening today. And Marissa is actually someone that I not have worked with in the past. She came with the First Baptist Church of Ann Arbor, but one of my other former colleagues, Gilmer Sanchez and John Carroll, who used to work at Amos Health and Hope, I had the pleasure actually working closely with Marissa. But I have the opportunity to talk to her today, and she can share a little bit more of her own experiences, not only working with delegations, but also doing some other work with Amos. So without any more talking on behalf of me, I would like Marissa to introduce herself and tell me who she is, what she does, what she's currently doing. So hit it away, Marissa.
Okay. Thank you, Felicia. So as you said, my name is Marissa Alanis. You said it nicer though. I am currently employed by Amos as the Donor Relations Officer. So that's a member of the fundraising and communications team at Amos. And I'm actually a remote staff person. So I'm based in the US. And that came to be though after I spent some time in Nicaragua, went on many delegations with Amos and really learned to grow and know and love the mission of Amos, and really wanted to have that connection to my organization that I wanted to work in fundraising for. So before that, as you mentioned, I grew up in the church, First Baptist Church of Ann Arbor, spent my college years at the University of Michigan, and really knew that I wanted to go into development and fundraising because it's a good opportunity to bridge people's gifts and abilities with the good work that's going on in the world, which is such a similar concept that we deal with in short-term missions as well.
Did you, Marissa? Absolutely. No, absolutely. Thank you for coming in here and being with us. One of the, like I said, I'm a person, I said this in the other podcast, I love asking questions. That's more what I like to do. I'm a very curious individual. But prior to coming to Nicaragua, did you had any previous short-term mission experience before that? Or was Nicaragua your first time being away from Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had actually been to Nicaragua in, I think, around 2009, because my church then had a sister church in Nandasmo. But it wasn't really a mission trip, I would say. I mean, maybe we called it that, but it was more of just visiting the people there. And like I said, I grew up in the church, so I had a lot of volunteer experience locally, but not internationally. And I think when I first came to Amos, which was in 2014, I had a lot of skepticism going through my brain about, if we would actually be doing anything of value in the communities we were going to. And I remember sitting in the room for our orientation before we had even gone into the community we were supposed to go into, and hearing from Dr. Laura Parajon and others, and I remember being really pleasantly surprised with the model that Amos uses. And yeah, I think my mind was blown at that point because I just wasn't expecting uh, the model to work. And now I've gone back on 4 other mission trips and volunteered down in Nicaragua on Amos's fundraising team for over a year. So I've seen how the model works and how people grow along the way by going down and experiencing that.
Oh, wow, wow, wow. Okay, all right. So we definitely would like to know more a little bit about that. But prior to doing fundraising, you obviously were a member of one of the groups. And one of the questions that I have here today is, what were some insightful things that you learned when you were with the FBC Ann Arbor group while visiting the communities?
Yeah, I think as I've been on more mission trips, I've realized that it's a process of growth as you go on more. So, there's a feeling or an experience that some people tend to have as they go on their first mission trip. And usually that's kind of just a sense of, everyone in the community is really generous, or there's a huge sense of community when they don't have, very many physical things in the same way that we do. But then I think each other mission trip after that, you're able to delve a little bit deeper, right? So one of my main takeaways a little bit later on was that, we're from the US and we have this way of living that we oftentimes want to, impose is a strong word, but share with maybe other people. And, realizing that ours is just one way of living and not everyone needs that same way
Yep.
or wants to live in that same way. So I think that, the insight that I've been able to have is dive deeper as I've been more and more connected to the mission trip model and, recognize that we're all human and we all have, moments where we can laugh and have joy and have sadness and grieve. And, but, there are a lot of systemic issues that underlie the realities that especially an organization like Amos working with really rural areas in Nicaragua. So I think I learned how to reconcile kind of those thoughts and hopefully how to guide my team members in delving a little bit deeper and thinking more critically about maybe some of those first impressions that they might have.
And speaking of impressions, I know that in other conversations you spoke, actually with Pastor Tim Spring and Jim Steinsbury spoke about the notion that North Americans have this tendency to want to fix things, to be able to get things done in a short period of time. Was there any of that in your group, or things that you noticed that perhaps were not exactly helpful, that in your opinion would have hindered the experience or anything like that? So
yeah, I totally get their thought of like, yeah, wanting to fix things. And I think also the tendency is wanting to have something done and finished, to be able to say, we did that. And that's kind of the antithesis in some ways of Amos's model. And they don't they don't discourage having a project not completed by the time that you leave, because really the mission teams are supposed to be short-term trips that plug into the long-term goals of the community, that the community is able to organize around, and that works when the healthcare model is based on community organizing. So I think that's a great one. I think also the most successful mission team members are the ones who surrender their need to be in control at all times.
I want to
Yeah.
hear that. I want to hear that. Okay.
Yeah,
Say a little
yeah.
more about that.
Sure. So, I mean, typically in our daily lives, we have control over what we do and where we go, how we get there, how much time it takes for us to get there. And when we go to another country, especially, in a rural community that doesn't have the same kind of infrastructure, we have to surrender our need to know what we're going to be doing at all times, to feel like we personally have the control. I love this too, because Amos does a great job of taking care of you, right? So I feel like I'm just like, Jomer, Felicia, here you go. I know you got me. I trust the staff. I trust that we're going to get done what we need to get done. And, even just being there is getting done what we need to get done. So I think I've seen it be unhelpful when people are too focused on control and unwilling to get out of their comfort zone, because, us Americans, or people from the US going down to a rural community in Nicaragua, we're already look out of place. We're sweaty. We probably have the wrong clothes on. Like, we're never gonna feel completely comfortable, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, that's why we're there in a spiritual sense, to learn and grow from that. And then also, I think it's better to, like the Amos model, be responsive to the needs over that, even that week, of the community, and just go with the flow and adapt to the circumstances that you're met with. So I think that. And I also think, we've kind of said this with the not wanting to fix things, but just being willing to learn and to try new things, and to realize that you don't have everything figured out. I think, oh man, I don't know the construction ins and outs, but I think the community members in one community were using like something unique, like maybe, oh man, I don't know, something unique as a level for construction purposes. And our team was, learning from that, of like, oh, this is how they get that done. And it's able to be measured in a different way than this tool that we have in the States, but it works. And so, just being able to really follow the community members' lead, instead of us trying to lead, I think makes the experience better for all parties.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Well, thanks. That's good. That's definitely not being able to be in control, let others lead you. Learned about creativity. There's other ways to do things, not just the way you have learned in the past.
Yes.
So, and with that along, would you say, Marissa, you probably spend, I believe, maybe more time in the rural communities in comparison to some other leaders. Is that correct? Right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And I think that makes also a difference in how other people perhaps can come to you with a little bit more, I don't want to say trust, but more like, hey, I know that you've been coming, you're staying here for a while. So it's different than when somebody comes for a week and says, okay, I spent some time with you. Great. God bless you. I got to go home. And then we'll see you again next year. So even though there is communication based on email, at least just from the staff, but it's not the same as when you are with a community member that normally doesn't have a way to get access to email, or maybe the only way to do it is through, cell phone. That's a whole different thing we're dealing with. But in your situation, you stayed longer, you went more out of the communities. Did you had any sense that when you had conversations with community members, they tell you anything about the impact of their groups or the delegations or anything like that came into conversation?
Yeah, and I think that it might have shifted over time too, because the long period of time that I spent in Nicaragua was, 2018 and 2019.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's been fewer delegations have been able to come down, and of course, and this will happen too once we're able to accept delegations again, and we're hoping 2023. So I think that there's what I've experienced is that there's just this new sense of energy, even when delegations in 2019 mostly were staying in the Nehapa area, so where Amos's headquarters is.
Right.
There was this new sense of energy because delegation seemed like a sign of hope for people. So, I mean, I sometimes was surprised by all the positive energy surrounding a delegation, but really, I couldn't think of really critical things that community members had said. I think it's really just, I always use the analogy that, like, when your church, or when my church would send off a delegation, there's usually a lot of excitement around that. There's usually, everyone knows that that's happening in the church. We'll usually preach, or have some sort of reflection on the Sunday before we leave, the congregation has an opportunity to donate and help fund the community projects that we're helping to work on. So there's a lot of energy surrounding that. And I think that that energy is mirrored once the team gets down, by the community or even the Amos staff or whoever is welcoming that delegation. And oftentimes there's a welcome ceremony in a community that mirrors that as well. So I think that the reality is a lot of the rural communities that Amos works with too are so remote that it's hard to even, access those for the people who live there even, or people, coming and visiting. It's rare that people visit from so far away. And I think it does mean a lot to them when teams do. And I think that as long as we as team members are focusing on, more of the elements of long-term partnership and knowing that our work is to step back and see the sustainable work happening around us.
Right.
I think that it can, Amos has seen that it can benefit the long-term goals of communities because they will, the mission teams will act as catalysts to, propel the healthcare work forward. So yeah, I would say a mostly positive experience. And I hope that that energy continues to be reflected, after COVID too, when there's been this time of, for so long, not having teams come down. I really think that they would be welcomed.
That's good. No, I agree with you. I remember that whenever we had any welcoming festivities, the community went out of their way to welcome the group to come. And obviously the group was always like, oh, we're so surprised to hear that we have this welcoming from people. It's like we're strangers, we don't know anyone here, but they're just happy and glad. I think it's also a sign of knowing that you are forming a fellowship with some people from other communities. And I know that in some certain churches, the way that we've worked in the past is that, let's say XY church supports the community in Chinandega or somewhere. And once that church keeps coming back to the same community, there is a different sense of relationship with them, more than the work in itself, and I think that's something important that I think we just need to be aware of. And I think of all people, we always said, you're not going to get the work done 1 week, forget it, but however, it's going to get done, and I think that's the most important part. But I think what people mostly take away is, again, that word relationships. And that's something that I always stressed in our devotionals or even an orientation, is like, they're going to take more about the value relationship that you had with them. And that's one thing that I appreciate about doing the home visits, is a chance for them to come into a home, ask questions, or for them to ask questions to the group back if they had any. So, and I know that there were some cultural barriers because most people in communities are shy. They don't really say much, but
a lot of mission team members are shy too, or don't speak Spanish well.
Yeah, that is true. Yes. So that's why it was good to have translators with us.
Yeah.
So, but in that sense, I know that what I observed, and again, you had Stacy as one of your leaders. I don't know if you ever had anyone else later on, if you tagged along with some other groups. As you know, I left in 2018, coming here to seminary. Did you ever have a chance to tag along with some other delegation team leaders, Marissa?
Yeah, I did. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do you think from that experience that you had? What were some things that you noticed that were perhaps not very helpful as leaders? This is more from the perspective as a leader, not so much about the U.S. culture, but what were some things that you observed personally that you thought maybe this is not such a good idea that you can do in a community or with your own team members?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think the main takeaway that I've seen is that there could be more prep work done before the team gets down, or maybe during the orientation phases, to really help teams kind of analyze the context that they're used to and the privilege that they carry in the context that they're going into. So I'll give a couple of examples because I think Amos, Amos does a good job trying to prepare you for some of the cultural changes, or little one of the principles of Amos's model is making sure that if you give a gift during a vacation Bible school to one child, you have to give it to all the kids, right? We want to make sure that there's fairness there. But I think there's a lot of other nuanced situations where mission team members have the opportunity to connect further to the community members. But if you're not stepping back and maybe thinking through what you say, it does the opposite. So one story that I always tell is, I call it the sushi story. But
I want to hear that. All right,
I always
go ahead.
tell this story of one of the teams that I went on, and the team member meant well, but we were sitting in a circle and trying to do an icebreaker with the kids at VBS, and everyone was going around and saying what their favorite food was. And so all the kids were generally saying like pollo frito, like fried chicken, or gallo pinto, rice and beans,
Yeah.
foods that they're used to, right? And even pollo was like a treat in these rural communities. And so, my critical analysis here is connect as a mission team member, try to connect with the kids, say something that they would recognize, or just one of the things that they're saying, even if it's not your actual favorite food. So one of our team members said that his favorite food was sushi, and it kind of broke up the connection there, right? Because Jilmer was our translator, and he had to describe what sushi was, and even he had said that he had only eaten sushi the week before our trip. And it is accessible in Nicaragua, but it's not accessible to rural communities. And so he had to kind of describe, oh, well, there's fish in it, and what else is in it, I don't know. And it kind of broke up the moment, and it was just a reflection of okay, this is a different context where we have access to all the cuisines in the world. And just something to be aware of think about the context that you're in, and make an effort to connect with people where they are and where you are, because you're in their space.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think it would be great to discuss that beforehand with your team, and also think about even the curriculum that you're using for a VBS kind of thing. I had another team I saw ask the question, what's the best gift you've ever received? Or does anyone have any pets? And both of those are tricky questions. They seem innocent, right? But when you're talking about really poor communities and you're talking about gifts that you receive, it's going to be different than in a US context. And pets also, there's a lot of animals in rural communities, but they're not often treated the same way that we treat pets. So I think there's a lot of nuances to that, but I would just say, yeah, if you have any questions or hesitations, just ask, because the staff like you and Jilmer, or the folks around would be able to answer you honestly and let you know if that might be a question that, like I was saying, breaks off a connection versus furthers a connection.
That's actually the first time I hear that you say that, because there is a difference about the type of curriculum that you use, depending. Again, it's like I was telling one of our friends that we read the Bible in the context of where we are, in the context of our countries. And I was saying to one of my friends, the same way, let's say I read Amos 5:24, let justice roll like a river. It's going to be very different how I see it than how he sees it or she sees it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We read things very differently, and understanding about what do people do in their communities, how do certain relationships work, male and female relationships work in the dynamics, they're very different. And also even within our own country as a Nicaraguan, it's not the same as a rural Nicaraguan than somebody from the city, that we have access to all those types of foods, that we can eat sushi, that we can eat pasta, that we can eat pizza, that we can eat all these types of things that most folks are not used to, again, because you don't find that, what people are used to, rice and beans, like you were saying, chicken, it's not everybody has access to chicken nor either eggs, it's like a luxury. that you are able to actually raise chickens in your house because you don't have the money to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or even pigs, pigs is a big commodity. You are able to raise a farm animal that will guarantee you food, but also guarantee you an economic income when you sell the pig to someone else, or even a cow. That is also a very, very big deal. So I always say to folks that came to communities, you can tell when somebody has a little bit more money with the type of farm animals they have. The more chickens, the more pigs, the more cows, that means they live pretty well because they can afford to buy the food for a cow or for a chicken or for something, and they can able to sell the eggs. So I think those are some really good, interesting points about revisioning our curriculum, revisioning the way that the words that we use, that, people don't have absolutely any connection. So
yeah, it reinforces, even, and like I said, even if you're honest and your favorite food was sushi or whatever, the best gift you've ever received was an iPad. Like it just reinforces the economic and the other, sort of differences that we have, when our whole point of working together is to reinforce the similarities that we have. So there's just a few things, and I would just encourage people to take a step back and think through, think before speaking, think before doing, in a way that, again, we're not used to in our daily lives, thinking through everything multiple times. But I think it's just that context invites us to do more.
Gotcha. No, that's good. So there's connection. There's certain things like you were saying, that people don't, again, I think it's also like you were saying about lack of preparation. What other lack of preparation you thought that people then were missing, besides obviously learning about the cultural context and that we're getting into? What else did you observe more, Marissa, at least in your travels besides that?
I mean, I think I would just give some tips maybe, from on the positive end.
Go ahead.
I think, and you can think about this beforehand or while you're there, but I think those who find the most value in a mission trip are able to connect on some level, right, with the community. And you can do this even if you don't speak Spanish. I've seen it done. One of my friends practiced and played the song Hallelujah with some kids in Tierra Blanca, and they sang it at the farewell ceremony. She's a great singer. So they connected on the similar song that they knew. One member had the help of our delegations coordinator translating and facilitating a dialogue with a lot of the moms who were at the VBS, taking their children. And so she was able to ask a lot of questions, which was great. And actually some of the best delegation members who've connected with communities the best that I've seen have been like 14 years old. And it's because they just start playing soccer with the kids. They go and then they fit right in and they're connected, and they're like, it's just, sometimes you don't even need words to connect, right? We have a lot of dance parties in our community. So I would definitely recommend thinking about dancing or singing, or, we've hosted a couple movie nights, but just things that bring people together. You don't necessarily need to know Spanish, but just opportunities to connect. And, I've said this the whole time, but it makes the experience beneficial for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. Now that you remind me about parties, we used to do that a lot with the college students.
Yeah.
We did that in a couple of communities that we were. And again, dancing is a very universal language that you don't really need anything else, just music, and have fun and can connect, But it was more fun. I don't know, I guess because college students, I guess I remember back in my days as a college student, we're so flexible and open-minded about learning that I think as we get a little bit older, we get a little bit more close-minded, or we are set in our own ways. I'm not saying that all adults necessarily behave that way, but it's more, as a college student, you're in the process of soaking in a lot of information, questioning a little bit about, the way that you're raised and stuff like that. And if you go to a Christian university or whatever, the same thing, you question your beliefs and all that kind of stuff. So you kind of like more open about it. So it's always a little bit more more flexible with the college students, I would say, than the
Yeah.
adults. Not that I did not have fun with the adults. I think we did
Yeah.
have some instances where we connected really well. But every group is very different, and
Mhm.
sometimes some groups were more focused minded on getting things done, especially when you had very small groups. So it wasn't as easy as trying to get them into the rhythm, especially when I work with groups that were in Managua. It was hard, but I tried my best for them also to connect with the staff that work with us,
Yeah.
uh, about what do you have in common with the staff. We love coffee. That's one thing that we sure every single team member love is coffee. So we
True.
got them in the conversations with group members. One particular person, she worked as a radiologist and she loved coffee. So when she came constantly, so we asked her, hey, so you like to go to the coffee shop? And say, oh yeah, sure. So we used to always tease her, but again, it comes with time. It
Hmm.
comes with much more the relationship aspect of it. That is not just about work. And when we had to do work, we had to do work, because this was a kind of a different delegation. It was not like, we're going there for a week and we're doing a project. The
Yeah.
project that she had to do was really specific, and she
Yeah.
had to make sure that she met those goals. But in the meantime, we tried to always add the relational component. What do you have in common? Okay, I'm not a radiologist, but we all like coffee. So can we
Yeah.
speak about the language of coffee? So yeah, definitely, those are things that I think we should take into consideration, like you're saying, even if you don't know the language. In that sense, the other question that I had is, what would be some helpful other tips that you think would be useful for other leaders that are coming to a country? Like, I have no idea what to do. What do you recommend? What should I do? Especially as a young person like yourself, Marissa, what kind of things would you say to them that would help more enrich the experience? And I criticize, not with the point of saying you have done all terrible things or groups are doing terrible things, but I think it's always good to analyze and seeing, hey, I think it would be good not to do what somebody else already did. And as they say, through our mistakes or the bumps we make, we learn. And we're all guilty of that. I myself, I am, because again, you just learn as you go. So, but without that, what would you recommend or something to people that are coming on future trips?
Hmm.
Or even if they want to volunteer. So that's another one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think some of them we've already hit on in terms of, maybe doing some more preparation before and reminding people to analyze the context they're coming into, and the power that they hold from coming from the US into a rural Nicaraguan community. But I think, some other things that I've found success with are we would have a team member lead a devotional every morning, and I would lead a reflection every night. And we really tried to stick to that. And I think it was really useful for our team to grow as well, and, connect further in a deeper level about what we had experienced that day. So, some prompts that I would use are, um, what was something that brought you joy today? And then everyone would go around the circle and say something, because we didn't all, usually the teams are doing multiple projects if it's a little bit larger team. So you don't all see all the things that are happening. And so it's really great to have that moment of, centering ourselves and connecting as a team. Another question was, how did you see empowerment in action today? So,
That's a good question. Yeah.
yeah, one of the and I think some of the best moments where you see empowerment are, with a Nicaraguan teenager who's touring you around and helping you get to the houses where you're installing water filters or whatever it may be. And then you're seeing him learn along the way and actually be able to explain how a filter functions to the family, which is, an indication of he was empowered, and that is what's going to make the work sustainable. Right. And so those kind of moments, I think would bring us together. And I would say too, which you mentioned too, it's a relationship building aspect, but we would always invite the AMIS staff, not just the translator, but the whole staff who is in the community, because there's usually drivers, there's, maybe a project coordinator, there's other folks that come along. And then also a lot of times the youth would hang out with us, or, some community members would be there too. So we would always invite them into our evening reflections. And, you want to make sure you adjust because you're going to have translating. So you're
Yeah.
going to just want to stick with one question or something like that. But for the sake of time, but it was super useful because, like if we are wanting to build these relationships, we don't want to kick everyone out and be like, oh, sorry, we have to have our time of reflection. No, we want to invite those people in and say, why don't you reflect along with us? And we can both share what we experienced today and building that connection going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd just say another thing that I think has been great for our teams is before we go down, we collect what we call letters from home from like the spouses or parents of team members, people who are closely connected to the team members. And so the team leaders would collect those beforehand, and each night we would read a letter from home, which was written to the team. And I think that was a really powerful moment to, we're talking about connection within the community, but we want to make sure our church is connected as well. And we're representatives of our church or whatever it may be, or university or institution coming down. And so we also made sure to present to our church members afterwards, take a lot of pictures, a lot of videos. I love videos. I think that's the best way to convey what you experienced. But yeah, make sure that your church is involved, especially when we're talking about the importance of long-term partnership. I think it's important. There's a lot of folks who might be really interested in the relationship, but can't go down themselves. So I think that's a good thing, is to think about how you're going to involve the people back home as well.
Absolutely. Within that, Marissa, would you say, maybe I'm derailing or going on a different route here? You speak about videos. We speak about having recorded information about what we're doing. What would you say we have to be careful of? Because you when we hear about short-term missions, we want to be careful about not making this a tourist visit. And there's always that danger. When I see danger, it's because I think it misses the point of what we're doing that. Especially right now in our days where we talk about the selfie culture in mission trips, where it's all about having pictures with the kids, and I know that, again, it's something that's being heavily criticized because it gives an image that we're here to save people. So I don't know, maybe that's one thing that I just thought in my mind when we talked about pictures and videos. So I don't know if you have what are your thoughts on that?
I mean,
poking you a little bit.
Oh, for sure. I think that that's really valid. And I think that there's a fine line, right, between like oh, I was with these kids all week, I want a photo with them, versus doing it in a more of a performative way. But there's a fine line. Who's to know what you intended or what the impact was, right? I think, something we emphasize at Amos is just having community members be the focal point. And so when we are, because I help with the communication side of things at Amos as well, and sometimes we do publish pictures of like a white delegation member and a community member, but we always try to make sure that the community member is leading the charge, or is prominently focused, or there's a clear image of partnership in that. And like I said, it's a fine line, but I think maybe just from my lens, it's about communicating that experience of partnership, and as a means to help other people realize the importance of investing in Amos and this work. So I think it can be done in positive ways. I think the non-positive ways, right, could be like, it's funny, I've seen people like include pictures of internet, like them with a bunch of kids that don't look like them on like dating profiles.
Oh my goodness gracious. Oh wow.
And I'm like, no, I think sometimes people think that elevates their status, or like, oh, I'm such a good person because I went down and volunteered and did this. And so I think it can be done in, like I said, more performative ways, which I would discourage. But I think just keeping the intent in mind of, we're trying to bring other people on the trip with us and help them experience what we experienced.
Okay. Oh, no, good. I just had to throw in that question there.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
been on
good
my
question
mind
and it's
about it. So
tricky. It's
yeah, it's a
tricky.
very tricky question. Because it also comes with the ideas like, look, and then not just with people from the United States, I think even with us, it's like, look, I'm doing a good deed, and it's like, but are you doing that for showing off, or are you actually doing that for a purpose,
Exactly. Yeah.
I worked also taking pictures when I used to work there at Amos. But again, it's like I think the best approach is to try to make it in a much more. This is the more of the community in itself, too,
Hmm.
as much as possible. And yeah, there's a partnership in a much more equal relationship as much as you can. You
Yes.
know. So
Yeah.
that's always something to think about. I think when we do that, and I think also again, it's be very careful about doing what we call tourism, short-term missions. That
Hmm.
what's one thing that I struggle with a little bit, not with Amos necessarily, but with other places that I used to work with, because it's just about spending less time in the community and more about being tourist more than anything else. And that's one thing that I appreciate about where I worked was we're gonna spend just 2 days literally in Managua. Managua, for those who don't know, is the capital of Nicaragua. And the rest of the whole week from, let's say, Sunday or Monday through Saturday or Friday or whatever, um, we're going to spend a lot more time in the community because that's our emphasis and that's our focus, and less time in the urban city. I know that with some other groups, we had to like be more in the urban areas, but even then we try to be as much proactive as possible as we could be. But that made such a big difference about seeing how people live, their environment. Obviously, we're in more comfortable situations because we had the structure that we work with at Amos. We had somebody to help us cook. uh Obviously it's
Yeah.
not the same as you go right there where people eat. um but even then, just trying to get people out of their comfort zone, walking to a house, this is how people live, not with the purpose of saying, oh, look how they live, but it's more like, hey, this is a home, what a community looks like. Let's ask some
Hmm.
questions that how do you live your life?
Yes.
What is something that you appreciate about, I don't know, whatever. Have a cup of coffee with us. And I try to be very intentional about doing that. When we did installation of water filters, that's one of our
Hmm.
other projects we did, is not just for the delegation member to do, here it is your water filter and that's it, but it's more about, can you tell us a little bit more about your house? How many kids are in your house? Or are you the aunt, the uncle, or the grandma, or the grandfather of the children that live here? And to be able to get in that relationship, and I think what helped a lot was engaging over a cup of coffee. Everybody loves most coffee in the communities, and me myself being a coffee addict, I must confess that. Yes, good. I'm glad to see that. She has actually a coffee mug. We
Hmm.
engage the conversations over a cup of coffee because it's a way to connect with people. It's something we have in common. So we sat down with them, we talked to them, and we had a really great conversation. Didn't change the world, but hey, you know what? It's more beyond than just doing something
Yes.
or doing a project. So
That's
there's
great.
yeah,
I'm gonna add that
absolutely.
to my list
Yes, do
of
that.
of
Absolutely.
tips. That's great.
Absolutely. And also thank you for your tips. I think that's something very important that we have to keep in mind when we go to another country. Um, those who are listening to us, we are speaking again in the context of Central America and Nicaragua. And I know that every country around the world has very different ideas about relationships, very different ideas about what it's like to share the emotional time. So I think that's something that we all have to keep in mind is whoever you're partnering as an organization, whether it's in Central America, South America, Europe, Asia, be sure to contact them and ask what would you
Hmm.
say is the best practices that we can do to engage those we're working with, because
Yes.
every culture is very different. I can't speak for other countries because I have not been there, but I can as a leader responsible to ask what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. Can we have folks from the village or any community come along with us and sit with us, because we want to have this kind of engaging conversations with them, not just saying we just came and left. So I think context is very important. For those who work in Central America or not necessarily in Nicaragua, but anywhere else, I think those are really good questions to or things that we have to think about when we go to another country, and what is the best approach that we can engage our community more than just being spectators. That's the right word.
Mm-hmm.
So, and with that, Marissa, do you have anything that you can consider helpful literature? Because there's so many books that are now out there about short-term missions. I know about When Helping Hurts. That's one of them. There's also within the American Baptist Church some literature that everybody can, I'm sure on their website we can find. But you personally, as someone who's come to the country, what other recommendations you have in mind?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm giving you the young person recommendations of that. I have not read any books about this, but here, one, I guess it's a campaign in an organization that I've looked to in the past. It's called No White Saviors. And it was founded and led by a majority female, majority African team of professionals based in Uganda. And they've led some legal efforts to hold, missionaries that have done harmful work accountable. I said quote unquote missionaries, and done some advocacy campaigns. So they have an Instagram account that I follow. I think they also have a podcast called No White Saviors, at No White Saviors. And then a couple other things. I don't know if you're familiar, or if people listening are familiar with the article White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. It's by Peggy McIntosh. And it's a lot of statements that are thinking about what it means to unpack like your whiteness, if you're white or white passing, as compared to people of color. And I'm assuming that was written in a US context, but what I would challenge your team to do is kind of adapt that to what it might look like to enter another country, a developing country, what it might look like to be economically advantaged or from the US with an infrastructure of the US, and think about what statements might apply to you. So examples are, we have the ability to travel outside our country. At home, we have our own rooms and our own beds. We can rely on roads to be able to access places outside our town. We have bug nets and bug spray to bring with us. And then my favorite one is people aren't surprised when they observe that we are hardworking, capable, joyful, or generous. So I think I made those statements up, but they was based on, statements of that article that were in that article, White Privilege, but just applying that to an international mission trip kind of context. I think that can be a helpful exercise. One other article that we encourage our global health practicum students to read is called Duffel Bag Medicine by Maya Roberts. And I think that maybe more geared toward medical mission teams or organizations, but it paints a picture of how, some mission trips can be harmful to communities. And it's the opposite of what Amos strives to do. But I think we need to be on the same page before we get down as to, what is our role. And our role a lot of times, as you said, is to connect and to recognize that it's not about us. It's about the community. It's not about us, and surrender that need for it to be about us.
Yeah. No, that's a really good, helpful information, Marissa. We'll certainly in our podcast, as you know, it's going to be downloaded or uploaded, I should say, to YouTube. So we want to make sure that all the information that we hear from those who are listening right now, we want to provide that information. So for your future groups or anyone that's interested can be able to have that material available and not be afraid or ask the hard questions, about going on mission trips. And again, it's about learning experience. It's about learning, hey, you know what, there were things that were done in the past that were completely wrong or exactly not very culturally sensitive, but we want to find a way where we can better that experience in relationships. So that way it's not like in the past that, you had people, be the ones that think they knew everything about the world, and it's not. We certainly are not people that know anything. We're actually learners, and again, with the attitude of Christ, to serving others, being a servant, laying his life for all of us, and to be able to not think in the sense that I'm a leader, so I'm in a higher position, but it's the leader that actually gets on its knees and washes the feet of others. That is a true servant of God. So I think we're going to go along with those lines about it. And one last thing before we end up, Marissa, thank you so much for joining us today. To think also here biblically, when I mean thinking biblically, so when we read the Bible, we look at the history of God's people, the people of Israel. And the picture of the people of Israel is not a pretty one. There's a lot of flaws that the people of Israel made, but they're still in the Bible. We sometimes have this tendency that we do not want to talk about the ugly things or the things that makes us feel uncomfortable and say, oh, we're just going to put them down somewhere else and not think about it, put them in a closet. But the Bible, what makes it interesting is that it talks about the ugly flaws of the people of Israel. And I think but with the purpose of learning, with the purpose of changing, with the purpose of being better people. And, it's a constant reminder always in the scriptures about what are you doing that is harming people? Why is it that the way things are harming you? Idolatry, injustice, treating vulnerable sectors of our communities, in a way that is not Christ-like. And I think the Old Testament prophets hold no punches about it and tell it like it is. And the same way I think with missions, it's a way to look at ourselves and saying, these are things that have been really helpful and we want to keep going forward and doing that. But at the same time, there are things that are very harmful and we need to change that. Because if we believe that we all are going to be sitting together at the table is about inviting others. I think we shouldn't be having any types of hindrances or walls that can divide each other. But again, we have to look at what we're doing that's not correct. So thank you once again, Marissa, and thank you for our listeners who are tuning to us in our podcast. God bless you and take care and all.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is supported by the American Baptist Churches of Pennsylvania and Delaware, ABCOPAD. The music at the beginning and end of the podcast was composed and produced by Jason Shaw. Our editor for this episode was Greta Zoe. And big thanks to the interviewers and interviewees for being part of the program, and see you in the next one.